smells delicious. Definitely the right atmosphere for this project. Today, I'm going to be sculpting and molding a cartoon-style pie that will look like it had been thrown and splattered against a wall. For a simple project like this, I found that it is easier to sketch out what is going to be worked on before starting working with the clay. Doing so means that less time will be spent backtracking, and the sculpture will be started with a better idea of what is being made. I'm using this piece of melamine, or countertop material, because it is already very smooth and neither the silicone or clay or hot glue will stick to it very well. Once the sketch is finished, it's time to start sculpting. The clay that I'm using is basic water-based clay from Michaels. I started with placing the clay underneath where the pie tin goes because it needs to have a proper seal. If there are any gaps, the molding silicone will leak into the empty space and be wasted. As I progressed with the sculpture, I made sure that any gaps underneath the rim of the pie tin were filled in. Now that the sculpture is completed, I can start assembling the walls for the mold. I'm drawing lines between the points that stick out the furthest in an attempt to use less molding silicone. When making a mold, it's best to keep a minimum of a ½ inch clearance between the edge of the sculpture and the outside edge of the mold. Any less and there is a risk of having the mold produce deformed castings later on down the line. I used a level on top of the pie tin to measure how tall the sculpture was. I added an additional ½ inch to the measurement to make the walls for the mold the proper height. I then cut strips of 3/4 inch styrofoam to the correct size for the height of the walls, and cut the strips to fit between the lines that I drew on the board. I then used hot glue in a couple spots on the bottom of the styrofoam strips to tack them down to the melamine. Once they're tacked down, I sealed the back edge with more hot glue. I found that the demolding process is less aggravating when the hot glue is along the back of the styrofoam as opposed to underneath it. When it's underneath, it's harder to remove. When sealing the box for the mold, it is very important to make sure that it is completely sealed. The silicone is very sneaky, and it will leak out anywhere that it can. Time to glove up. For a project such as this, it's not required to use mold release, but it does help. Silicone only adheres to more silicone of the same type. It can grip to something that is very porous or has a lot of texture, but it won't stick to it, which means it won't stick to the clay or the tin or the melamine. I split a gallon of Smooth-On's Mold Max 30 in half. I had an old empty bucket and split a new gallon in half by weight as best as I could. Mold Max 30 is mixed 10:1 by weight, which means for every 10 ounces of silicone, 1 ounce of hardener is used. Since I'll be using half of a new gallon-sized kit, I'll simply need to use half of the kit's hardener. I really like watching the colors mix, and I hope that you do too. When mixing, make sure to mix everything thoroughly. Be sure to scrape the sides and bottom of the container when mixing. Since I don't have a vacuum chamber or a pressure pot to use for projects like this, I've had to come up with different ways to minimize having bubbles in my molds. A method that I've found that works well for me is that I pour a small part of my silicone on the high points of my sculpture and allow the silicone to be stretched by gravity. As far as mold making goes, only the layer in contact with the mold subject needs to be bubble free. The rest of the mold can be a little less perfect. Now that the first pour of silicone has had a chance for the bubbles to pop, I can pour the remaining silicone into the mold. For this pour, I'm going to use the second half of the 1 gallon kit. I've been adding pigment to the silicone to try and make the mold purple. Mold Max 30 turns pink when mixed with the hardener, and that's boring to have all the molds the same color, so I was trying to make this one purple. This layer of the mold is mostly just filler. There is mostly just vacant space that is being filled in at the top of the mold. I've been saving any scraps of silicone that get left in buckets or leaked out of other molds. I blended up those pieces and made sure that they were fully dry, and now I have a good amount of bits that can be added to this mixture. Chunky. Since the first pour has already hardened and captured the surface of the sculpture, it won't matter if this layer has any chunks in it. I came back to my shop later in the evening to finish the last pour of silicone. I wanted to use 2 pounds of silicone for this pour. Let's see how close I get. Pretty good. I used a bit of silicone thinner from Smooth On for this batch. The previous batch left a very textured surface, and I wanted to give this pour every chance to fill in those little spaces and bond securely to the previous layer. When this pour was done, the previous layer was tacky and had the consistency of Jell-O. This is a perfect time to do another pour to ensure that the two layers bond properly. And there you have it. Be sure to check out part 2, where I make a mold of a few extra bits. As always, thanks for watching.